From mysterious mounds filled with 6,000-year-old corpses and artifacts to over 40 different cult sites scattered throughout the Negev desert in Israel, these are ancient structures found in the desert that should not exist. Out in the western Cape York region of Australia, there's this odd stretch of land, more than 60 kilometers long, where the earth just bulges up in huge mounds. For years, researchers have been trying to figure out what the hell they are, even though the local Tjungundji people have been telling everyone that these mounds were burial sites. Nobody took them seriously. Instead, scientists came up with all sorts of bizarre ideas. Like, they even suggested that birds were somehow responsible for creating the 250 mounds. Yeah, birds. Well, in 2018, they decided to use radar to scan 11 of the mounds. And big shocker here, the natives have been right all along. Not only did the mounds have human remains inside, but they also uncovered old artifacts like spears, flowers, and coral. Some of the mounds could be as old as 6,000 years. Basically, around the same time the Egyptians were building the pyramids. In 2015, archaeologists came across around 100 ritual sites in the Eilat mountains in Israel, part of the Negev desert. The sites were full of stone circles and some phallic-shaped structures. But the creepiest thing about these finds, unless you're particularly adverse to phallic-shaped artifacts, was the fact that cult activity had been carried out there. There were 44 different cult locations. We don't know exactly what went down at these sites, but it's pretty clear that death and fertility were big themes. The sites were built around 8,000 years ago, and a lot of them had large stone circles that pointed towards smaller phallic-looking stones. Plus, there were these bizarre burial practices like burying stone objects upside down. They had also chosen spots for these sites that had great views. Maybe for a dramatic effect, but who knows. This isn't even all of it though. Archaeologists have found even more sites beyond the Eilat mountains, including a survey that discovered 349 additional sites scattered across the region. Ghost towns are already creepy, right? No one around, large empty spaces that were built for lots of people, now left to rot and crumble away to the unforgiving, ever-present passage of time. Well, there's one ghost town in one of the most famous deserts in the world, the Sahara. It's called Jado, an ancient abandoned settlement in Niger, right on the border with Libya and Algeria. Jado used to be a busy trade hub, home to the Tuareg people, nomadic Berbers who lived in the desert. The town was strategically located on trade routes that connected to North and West Africa. The buildings here are made of mud brick, some of which are several stories high. But as trade routes shifted and the environment got drier, people started abandoning the town, and eventually it was left empty. Today, all that's left are these eerie, crumbling buildings battered by the desert winds. You knew we weren't getting through this list without at least one mention of Egypt. In the Nubian desert, there's this strange arrangement of stones called the Nabta Stones, dating back around 6,000 to 7,000 years. These flat granite slabs from circles and semicircles, and they're kind of a mystery. Some researchers believe that there were an ancient calendar of sorts, used to track the stars and other astronomical events. The alignment of these stones is so precise that it shows the people who built them had a pretty sophisticated understanding of the skies. The stones are also tied to a cattle cult that existed in the region. You can actually find carvings of cattle on some of the stones, which likely means these animals were really important in these people's spiritual beliefs. We still don't know exactly what the stones were used for or who exactly built them, but it's clear that these ancient people had some pretty advanced knowledge about astronomy and agriculture, way ahead of their time. Out in the middle of the Sahara Desert in Niger, there's this incredible site called Gobero. Discovered in 2000 by a team led by archaeologist Paul Sereno, Gobero is basically a giant ancient graveyard dating back around 10,000 years ago. It's made up of 8 different burial sites, and the amount of information it's given archaeologists about early human societies is a lot. It's given them a lot. 10,000 years ago, this area wasn't the dry, barren wasteland it is today. It was a green paradise, full of lakes and wildlife. The people who lived here were a mix of hunter-gatherers and early farmers, and the graves show they lived with domesticated animals, like cattle. The bones found at Gobero, both human and animal, tell a story of a community that lived in harmony with their environment before things started to suck. As the climate changed and the region became drier, the once healthy, plant-filled area area slowly turned into the desert we know today. Now, if you've never heard of the desert kites, I don't feel bad. They're a bit of a weird discovery. These are giant V-shaped stone enclosures found all over the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa. Some of these strange formations stretch over to 1,000 meters long. They're massive. They got their name because, well, they look like giant kites from the air. But what are they actually used for? Some researchers believe they were ancient hunting traps. You'd have these enclosures built in the shape of a V, and wild animals like gazelles would be herded toward them by hunters, making it much easier to trap them. These things could date back as far as 10,000 years ago too. The sheer scale and complexity of these things is crazy. From the sky, they look like something made by aliens. They remind me of crop circles. I had to slip aliens in there at least once. I'm contractually obliged to the higher-ups at the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Anyway, the fact these things have been around for tens of thousands of years is just amazing. No one really knows how these ancient people managed to coordinate such elaborate hunting strategy, especially in such a harsh, dry environment. Okay, now let's talk about Great Zimbabwe, which is definitely one of the coolest ancient sites in Africa. These ruins are massive. They're the remains of a city that was around between the 11th and 15th centuries. This place was a whole civilization, and the stone structures here are still standing today. The most famous part of the ruins is the Great Enclosure, a huge circular stone wall that's nearly 250 meters, or just over 820 feet in diameter. What's so wild about it is that there are no mortar joints holding the stones together, just perfectly cut granite blocks stacked up. The level of precision in the stonework is crazy, and we still don't really know how they managed to pull it off without modern tools. Now, we know that the Kingdom of Zimbabwe was rich and powerful thanks to trade in gold and ivory, but there's still a lot of mystery around the people who built these structures. The lack of written records means we're mostly guessing. But the fact that a pretty sizable and advanced civilization had success in such a harsh region, dry with limited resources, makes this place seem almost impossible to have existed. Petra, oh how I want to see this place in person. If you don't know the place by name, you'll know it from images. Petra is an incredible ancient rocked city carved right into the cliffs of the Jordanian desert. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you've seen Petra. This place is so much more than just a cool looking set piece though. It was built by the Nabataean people around the 4th century BCE. And for centuries, it was a major trade hub. The city's carved into red sandstone mountains, and its most famous structure is the Al-Khazni, or the Treasury, which has a breathtaking, intricately carved facade. The entire city wasn't just built on the surface though. They carved out entire tombs, temples, and houses into the rock itself. They also had an insane water system that funneled rainwater into cisterns and channels, essentially for a city like this to survive in an environment that's super dry and harsh. Petra was abandoned around the 17th century though, and it took until the early 19th century before it was rediscovered by the outside world. By that point, nature had almost completely reclaimed the place. But even when you look at it today, it's still hard to wrap your head around how they managed to build such a monumental city in the middle of a desert, with technology that was pretty primitive by today's standards. You probably know about Egypt's pyramids, right? But have you heard of the Pyramids of Meroë? Found in the Nubian desert of Sudan, these pyramids belong to the Kingdom of Kush, which ruled from around 800 BCE to 350 CE. Now, while Egypt was building its giant pyramids, the people of Meroë were building their own. These ones are smaller, but they're just as mysterious. The Pyramids of Meroë are steep and sharp, with over 200 pyramids still standing. And the crazy thing is, a lot of them haven't been fully explored yet. What's even stranger is that there are almost no written records of the Kushite people who built them. So we don't know exactly why they built these massive tombs, but it's clear they were a sign of wealth and power. The kings and queens of Kush were buried in these pyramids, and many of them were adorned with riches. But after the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Kush collapsed, and the pyramids were mostly abandoned. Let's head to the American Southwest now, to Chaco Canyon, a place in the desert that's been baffling archaeologists for years. years. Chaco Canyon was the heart of the ancient ancestral pueblos, a civilization that lived in what is now New Mexico between 900 and 1150 CE. This place was like the capital city for an entire culture, and it's one of the most complex archaeological sites in North America. These folks were advanced. They built these huge, multi-story stone buildings, massive complexes like Pueblo Bonito, which has over 650 rooms. It was a center for trade, astronomy, and religion. No one knows exactly how they got their materials to build these places, considering the area around Chaco Canyon is pretty barren. The stone used for construction came from places miles away, and these ancient people somehow hauled it all the way to the canyon. And the thing that really makes it feel like a mystery is the way they aligned the buildings. Some of the structures in Chaco Canyon are aligned with stuff up into the sky, like solstices and lunar cycles, meaning, just like the Mayans, they seem to have advanced knowledge of astronomy. Also like the Mayans though, their civilization dissipated. Around the 12th century, the canyon was abandoned.